My view has been for many years that businesses should exist to do more than just achieve profit for their shareholders. I think they have both a responsibility, an obligation, and the opportunity to be part of the solution to some of the most pressing problems of our time. We very deliberately don't have a strategy. It's a controversial thing to say, but I think that the tighter we create the straitjacket of strategies and strategic plans, the more we fetter the creativity of our people. And what we're trying to do is create an environment where actually innovation is happening the whole time, all around the fringes of the ecosystem, and the bits that succeed, the bits that work, are going to be adopted and taken on. The bits that aren't need to be left behind. I think over time what I realized was it was much more of a calling to do work that was more fundamentally aligned with my own personal values. The stars aligned when B Corp came to the UK in 2015. I looked at the front page of the website and I said, wow, I didn't realize it, but this is everything I believe business should be about.
Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Tom Bourne, founder and Chief Ecosystem Officer of Greenheart Consulting. I'm Mark Reeves from PKF Francis Clark, and I'll be your host. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to get updates and notifications on when our latest episodes are available. Morning, Tom. How are you today?
Mark, good morning. I'm well, thank you, and thanks for inviting me on.
Not a problem. You are the belle of the ball, as we'll come on to, as I referred to before. I just want to, for our audience's sake, I just want to talk, have you explain what Greenheart Consulting does. And looking at your website, it's a brilliant description on your website, a small and close-knit ecosystem of passionate and experienced impact professionals who share a common vision, a world in which every business thrives by caring for people and planet as much as profit. Could you expand for our audience? What does that really mean to you?
Of course. Well, it's very simple for us, really, and very intuitive. My view has been for many years that businesses should exist to do more than just achieve profit for their shareholders. I think they have both a responsibility, an obligation, and the opportunity to be part of the solution to some of the most pressing problems of our time. And those problems are both social and environmental. So everything from climate change, biodiversity loss, through to rampant and escalating social inequality. I think business has a really important role to play in finding the solutions to those. And I say that for two reasons. Firstly, I think, gone are the days when, it might have been tempting to say, well, look, that's the job of government and policy to resolve issues like that. Yes, we need tighter regulation. Yes, we need better taxation and reform subsidies. But these are system-wide issues that are caused by and affect the whole economy. So therefore, every part of the economy needs to be involved. So what Greenheart does is we work with those businesses. The for-profit sector is our space. We work with those businesses to identify, measure, and manage the areas in which they are contributing, or they have an opportunity to contribute more to social and environmental betterment, if you like. And then help them sort of through that journey of improvement. So, put simply, we are a sustainability consultancy, but we are deeply, deeply passionate about what we do.
A big thing that you see from your website and from what we've chatted before is about this B Corp concept, and there's a big buzz at the moment, hence my comment about belle of the ball, about companies obtaining B Corp status. Could you just talk about that B Corp background a little and how it's come, where it started, how has it come to the UK?
So absolutely, B Corp is really pivotal to this shift that I just described from shareholder-centric business models to much more stakeholder-inclusive models. It is very much built on that premise. It came from the US, where it was founded sort of around 15 years ago, and came to the UK in about 2015. And really kind of answered this question that was beginning to sort of emerge in the mind of business leaders about, what are we really here for? What is our role in addressing some of these things? So B Corp itself represents a few things. First and foremost, it is a really comprehensive operating framework, if you like, against which businesses can benchmark themselves and establish whether they have all the kind of fundamental architecture in place to be looking properly at social and environmental impact, and then set themselves a pathway to improve. It's also as a movement, it's an incredible forum for leaders who carry the same values, who think the same way, and want to collaborate and convene with each other to drive change at a system level. And look, there are, as I'm sure you know, Mark, there are plenty of sustainability related, reporting frameworks and certifications out there. But this is slightly different in the sense that it really covers every aspect of a business's model, and it also has this sort of third-party verification process. So a business goes through it, they're not just marking their own homework, they're actually being judged against their peers.
Okay, so it gives you a framework for that measurement aspect you talked about earlier. Come back to that people, planet and profit. One of the commercial challenges that we've heard over the last sort of 10 years is it's very good saying some of these worthy things and putting them on your websites and that type of stuff. But that profit element of it, how did companies actually make a difference on people and planet if they're not making a profit? How do they balance between those elements?
Well, they can't, is the short answer. And I think it's really important to sort of unpack this notion that profit and purpose are mutually exclusive. They are not. And it is not the case that operating a more purposeful, more responsible business means trade-offs on profit. In fact, I think as we venture forward into an increasingly unknown economy, probably the reverse is likely to be the case. And generally, volatility is the volatility around the world to some degree. A lot of it can be pegged to the results of climate change or instability, geopolitical instability, and actually managing as a business our reliance on natural resources, on social capital, will help protect us against some of those fluctuations. So I think in terms of long-term resilient business thinking, this makes an awful lot of sense. And there are loads of, I think, examples of where that is already starting to manifest for companies.
Yeah, the philosophy behind it of that balance and that resilience has never been so important at the moment. And if the last 3 years have shown anything, it's basically we thought we had a rule book. Actually, no, we no longer have any rule book whatsoever. And you're just waiting for the next shoe to drop on that side. Come back to where my intro side of things. You call yourself a chief ecosystem officer. What's a chief, apart from the acronym comes to CEO, what's a chief ecosystem officer?
Well, it's obviously a slightly playful take on that acronym, but we do describe ourselves and operate as a business slightly differently to some others. When I have the great privilege of having founded the business and therefore am able to take its culture in whatever direction I suppose see fit, as long as people keep joining me on that journey. And one of the things that I decided very early on was that I really wanted to build a very different type of business that wasn't hierarchical in the traditional sense, that wasn't sort of mechanistic and linear and very much focused on targets and individual targets and so on. So basically, we tore up the usual playbook of how do you grow a business, and decided to be much more led by the sort of inspiration of living systems. So we call ourselves an ecosystem very deliberately because we are very much, everybody in the business is an integral and essential part of that ecosystem operating together, rather than seeing the business as a machine with the people just being cogs that, with instruction manuals. So we treat ourselves in that way. We talk about ourselves in that way. We have a flat sort of self-managing type structure with no hierarchy. very much interdependent, with decentralized decision-making processes and so on. So we push the ecosystem analogy quite far, and it's a very good way of describing how we operate. And my role really is to sit in the middle of it, not at the top of it, just shepherding things around, stewarding the health and the evolution of the ecosystem. And it works really well. It's amazing how much more bought in people can get to a culture that describes itself like that.
That's an interesting. I draw a parallel there between Spider's Web, if you like, at that stage, and partnership models. Because partnership models kind of went out of fashion a little while ago as the rush towards corporatisation, centralisation. But Francis Clark, we're a very large partnership ourselves, and part of what we pride on is that decentralisation to a certain extent, that collegiate try and bring everyone along together. So are we going back to perhaps revisit some of those, could be seen as old-fashioned partnership values now?
I think so. I mean, at the heart of it is alignment, and I think that one of the biggest wars we all face at the moment is the war for talent, recruitment and retention increasingly difficult, and organisations having to think much more creatively about how they attract and retain people. And I think for me, it's really very simple. Firstly, I never really wanted to manage people. I never wanted to grow a business, and therefore it was instinctive in me that a hierarchical model where I was in charge just was never going to work. So we needed a structure that would allow everybody to sort of shoulder their bit of responsibility and share all of that around. And I think we are very lucky in professional services that the people who work in that environment are problem solvers. They tend to be very they want to find solutions to the things around them, so they lend themselves nicely to that sort of environment. But it's also just about alignment. How can you really get people on the same page and driving towards the success of the organization if they are so far removed from where and how the decisions are made and where the rewards are distributed? So really, it's a bit of the two for me.
I suppose that taps into one of the current issues. You mentioned about culture, about purpose, which I've always preferred to strategy. And there's the old adage that culture eats strategy for lunch. In modern world, we've now got remote working, we've now got hybrid working. Your model seems perhaps easier to adapt to that hybrid and remote world rather than the hierarchical linear systems. You find it easier to adapt to a hybrid working world?
Well, we're very lucky because actually we've been growing very fast for the last few years, and most of our growth has come since the start of COVID. So we've been hybrid since basically since inception, if you like, and we think we've now found the right balance. Again, it's easier doing what we do because you've got people who are much more intuitively used to just kind of getting their head down and getting on with their work, but there is a large creative element to what we do that means we should be together. And so we think we've found the right balance. We have a workspace in London that we convene on pretty frequently, but we've also invested heavily in the kind of systems to allow the remote working, and that works as well. But I just want to sort of go back to your observation about strategy, because it's absolutely on point. And in fact, we very deliberately don't have a strategy. It's a controversial thing to say, but I think the tighter we create the straitjacket, if you like, of strategies and strategic plans, the more we fetter the creativity of our people. And what we're trying to do is create an environment where actually innovation is happening the whole time, all around the fringes of the ecosystem, and the bits that succeed, the bits that work, are going to be adopted and taken on. The bits that aren't need to be left behind. So it's not obviously just a Wild West. We have a very clear focus and a sort of framework for our activities. So we don't have an issue with prioritization and people going off on complete wild goose chases, but neither do we have sort of such set definition for what we're going to be doing from year to year that people can't just sort of pitch in with something slightly out of left base.
I really tie into that. One of the things that really annoys me is definitions of missions and purposes and values and objectives and all that type of stuff. And people get really, really focused on, is that a mission statement, or is that a vision, or is that an objective? And I kind of sit to one side going, I don't really care what you call it. If we all agree that we should be doing X, can we just get on and do X rather than trying to find whether it's a mission or a vision or something like that?
Absolutely, absolutely, and we've been having those exact discussions ourselves over the last 6 months, because it's always good to trial on yourself all the things that you talk to clients about. But totally agree. We are crystal clear on what we are here to achieve. We have it articulated. I don't care whether we call it a mission, a vision, a purpose, or whatever. The important thing is that we get on with work that is aligned with delivering it.
I think that also helps. And you mentioned on recruitment earlier, it can also help on that side, on both sides, in that the wrong type of candidate will instantly sense, wait a minute, this isn't going to work and you're not going to waste time. But to the right type of candidate, it will stand out more than some of the competition that's around.
Absolutely, and actually, to an extent, clients as well. We are not for every client. There's no doubt about that. I mean, these days, I'm afraid you have to pay me quite a lot of money to put on a suit, and there are clients for whom that's just not the approach they want. The important thing for us is that we turn up as ourselves, because we are very, very passionate and very good at what we do. There is no point in us trying to sort of, put on any sort of mask, because we will be automatically holding ourselves back. So we appreciate not every client will want that. They will want something, potentially a bit more corporate, a bit more polished, or whatever. We work with plenty of corporate clients, but they all share our values. And so there is a kind of self-selection that goes on. We work with the clients who have the biggest potential to create impact.
I've got to take you back a little for our audience. You started as a hard-nosed corporate lawyer. So I like the mentions of the suit and that type of stuff, because I imagine there wasn't much choice going back 15, 20 years. As a hard-nosed corporate lawyer, you were in a shirt and tie, you were in a suit at that particular moment. How do you transition from a corporate lawyer to what you are today? What was that journey, briefly?
I thought you might flush that skeleton out of my closet, Mark. Thank you. I'm not sure how hard-nosed I was, for starters, and I certainly never felt particularly comfortable in a suit. And I did, actively question in my mind, if not vocally, from day to day, I went for many days in a row without ever seeing a client in law, and I thought, why am I turning up in a suit and tie? And I know that's just kind of the way it was. But how did I transition? I think I think at the time I probably had I guess misplaced feeling that all my clients in business were having a lot more fun and probably making more money than me, and therefore I wanted to have a crack at it. I think over time what I realized actually was it was much more of a calling to do work that was more fundamentally aligned with my own personal values. And just to sort of go back to B Corp, the stars aligned when B Corp came to the UK in 2015. I looked at the front page of the website and I said, wow, this is just, I didn't realize it, but this is everything I believe business should be about. It should be about really nurturing, as you described, Greenheart's purpose at the start. It should be about caring for people and planet just as much as profit, because they are all interdependent. So I think that's kind of really where I realized my future had to lie in something that was really fundamentally aligned with my values and making what I perceive as a difference.
I might return to it in future podcasts. We did discuss beforehand there were 3 lawyers in around the same time in the same organisation, all got on to do very different things that we might pick up in future broadcasts. Come back to that B Corp that you mentioned there. If I'm an organisation at the moment and I'm thinking, I've heard a buzz about this B Corp status and it's wonderful and it'll solve all my problems, etc., etc., what would you say are the advantages of going down the route to become B Corp certified, and what are the disadvantages? Where will I struggle? Where will my business struggle?
Gosh, good question, and there's potentially a lot to unpack there. I think we ask every potential client, what's their motivation for doing this? And very rarely now do we hear, well, we just want, we want a badge as a point of difference. We want, we want something as a brand differentiator. If that is what people say, I always challenge them quite hard and say, look, are you sure you're doing this for the right reason? Because this is a really very difficult process. This is a change program. This is not just an audit. And so what you are facing into is a cultural and business model shift over time that is going to be a multi-year sort of long-term transition. The companies that I think are and ultimately they will invest a lot of resource, potentially a lot of time and money achieving it, but not necessarily really manifesting the sort of change in their business that is going to make them more resilient in the long run. I think the businesses who adopt it really successfully are those who say, look, we know we want to be the best version of ourselves. We know we want to be as responsible as we possibly can. We need a framework against which to measure ourselves, conduct a gap analysis, flush out our blind spots, and then go on a positive improvement journey. For that sort of business, B Corp is perfect. It doesn't provide all the answers, but what it does do is provide the essential architecture for being the best version of a business. It's a bit like a sort of MOT, if you like. You look at the business as the vehicle. Let's just get it MOT to make sure it's roadworthy. And then there are other ways in which you can sort of decide where the journey wants to take you. But fundamentally, is a business fit for the future? Is the question that the B Corp framework answers.
Yeah, okay. Can I take that into a slightly related area in that we mentioned, when we talked beforehand, about assessing, doing due diligence on businesses. We talked about equity now being very hot, although, and we might talk about this in a minute, they frame it under ESG rather than anything else. But I know you've been involved on that side, looking at due diligence on the sustainability of business. You talk about your work in that area.
Yes, yeah, we've. It's been interesting because the investor community has obviously, as we all know, got very hot on all this. I think increasingly the reality is that the money is following the impact, if you like. It's still not. For us, a large component of what we do. I'm always slightly surprised that we're not asked to do more sustainability due diligence. We have done it a few times, and we've used the B Corp framework because, as I said earlier, it is totally holistic. But it does give a fantastic sort of snapshot of how well governed is this business, not just from a corporate governance point of view, but from a sustainability point of view, because that is often overlooked when people are businesses are at the early stage of their sustainability journey. How good is the experience of workers? Is it up there with best practice? And likewise, relationships with the community. These are things that don't fall into commercial due diligence models, but the B Corp framework actually is extremely helpful for just establishing how responsible a business is.
I suppose that comes back a little to my earlier comment about profit, and basically if the equity houses are taking it seriously, they're not doing it out of the good of their souls. I have to be very careful with that phraseology. There is a profit element at the end from their perspective because it's part of their raison d'etre.
Yes, and I think particularly in the consumer space, I think brand equity value is now very intrinsically linked with responsibility. Consumers are just too connected and too clued up. They know what they're looking for. They will not forgive greenwashing. It is pretty much make or break often for brands. If they commit a massive greenwashing howler, that is going to knock a huge a value off the business. So it's important stuff.
Taking that into the related area here, you mentioned before about regenerative leadership as a concept. Can you expand that by what you mean on regenerative leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think again, this sort of goes back a bit to my own personal view on some of the issues we've been talking about. So sustainability, various buzzwords around this space, sustainability, net zero, these things imply that what we need to achieve is a kind of steady state where we're not doing any harm, which is great. And that's a really good aspiration. And for most businesses, that is a very, very, very tall order. But actually, if you think about, pursuing the continuance of growth, because sustainability is not anti-growth, this is about actually how can we keep creating growth, but the right growth in the right way. We've got growing population, we've got middle classes coming on stream in emerging countries, emerging economies, all of whom are going to want all the same things as us. But we're doing this on a planet of finite resources. So it stands to reason that unless we find a way of adding value back into the system, and I'm thinking of both social and natural capital, we're going to run out of it. It's a pretty simple. I often explain it to clients in sort of P&L terms, actually. So, if you're not sustainable, then you're loss making in social and environmental capital terms. Great to get to sustainable, but effectively you're only really at break even. Is that where your aspirations are, or actually should we be putting, should we be making profit? Should we be putting more back into the pot to draw on as the world grows, as people develop, and so on? So I think that's one aspect of it. It's going beyond sustainability into a place where we're giving back more than we take in social and environmental capital terms. But the other bit of it, I think, is very much about the consciousness of leadership. And what we need to move away from is this kind of very reductionist view of businesses as silos within silos within silos and just doing their own thing. It's about actually, where do we fit in the sort of wider worldview? How are we all connected globally? How are we connected into natural systems? Because we've become very separated from the planet on which we live at an individual and at a business level. So I think part of becoming a regenerative business or regenerative leader is about reconnecting, is about having that sort of much more interconnected awareness of where we sit in the global ecosystem.
I suppose that sets out a real ambition there on the basis of getting most businesses to zero impact is a real journey for them at that stage. And for the average business, if they've got the right intentions coming in, how long would it take them to achieve B Corp status as a measure at that stage? How long?
I mean, difficult to answer, because sort of how long is a piece of string, but most of the businesses we work with, from starting this project through to getting B Corp certification is unlikely to be less than sort of 18 months, possibly 2 years. There's a lot to do. And one of the questions you asked earlier that I failed to answer was, what are the obstacles? Where do people find it hard? And I think that leadership point is one of the most important. If this is delegated down and sort of somebody says, right, marketing, just go and get us B Corp, but there isn't kind of really sufficient leadership buy-in, then the business will struggle. Culturally, everyone needs to be on this journey. Apart from anything, it'll fail to deliver what it could do in the long run. But it will be very, very much more challenging unless you've got real passionate leaders championing it. The other thing is resource. Often businesses underestimate the extent of the changes necessary to go through this process. This is not something that you can kind of either outsource fully or just do with one or two people on top of their day job. This needs proper time, resource, and so on. So I suppose the message is, this is very much a worthwhile journey, but it's not to be lightly undertaken.
I tie into that entirely. We've mentioned B Corp a couple of times. Mitch Tonks had mentioned it in passing in one of our podcasts that we've actually done. But it is that journey, I think, you're using within there, rather than a project, rather than something you give to operations or something like that. It's a journey that therefore must be led from the top and ties into the conversations we're talking about purpose and culture. Is there something within that you can tie into the UK productivity crisis? Because at the moment, one of the things we've had for many decades in the UK is worsening productivity. Is this something that can help us at least try and address that?
Yeah, I mean, I think at a human level, we, and I guess this is my lived experience as well. Is I think our human level productivity is intrinsically linked to our sense of the purpose of what we're doing, and certainly, I have found that I've been way more productive since I've really got into the flow of doing something that is that I feel is worthwhile and totally aligned with my values. And I have to say that our biggest problem last year was trying to prevent burnout in our team, because I didn't have the problem of saying, guys, can you be more productive? Can you work harder? I was constantly saying, can we please slow down and just give ourselves a break? And that is exactly what I'm describing. People are so passionate about what we do that they want to give more and more and more. And of course, you need to keep some in the tank. So I do think that alignment with personal values and purpose, and working for a company that gives you space to do that, is a way of unlocking greater productivity at a human level.
It ties into various topics that Tom Peters, the management guru from the US, talks about making sure that you are aligned on purpose and culture. Does require very strong leadership and possibly a different set of skills for leadership. Perhaps that's the reference to the chief ecosystem officer there. You can't just continue as business as normal on that side.
And I was just going to add that I think neither can you manufacture it. I think a lot of, to your earlier point, a lot of time and effort is spent manufacturing values and purpose and vision. And I think where I have seen it manifest best, it is just evolved. It happens. The business as an ecosystem, certainly, and this is our experience, has defined its own reason for being, and it iterates and it evolves over time. It's never static. But I'm certainly not in control of it, and haven't been for a long time.
I suppose that make quite a lot of traditional business leaders uncomfortable on the, wait a minute, we can only influence this, we can't control it.
Absolutely. And I think actually there's a really important learning for business leaders in there, because going back to this sort of transformative shift in consciousness from mechanistic to more kind of ecosystemic leadership, this notion of regenerative leadership, I think, the old command and control paradigm, which, and I'm not criticizing it, because it is important and it is how most of the economy runs. It's just not the way I choose to run my business. But I think it is by and large, it has evolved from a place of fear and control rather than kind of necessarily enlightenment. And I use that word advisedly, and I certainly don't apply it to myself. But hopefully you see where I'm going. My personal experience as a leader of a decentralized organization is that I have had to be pretty bold in what I have let go of. And plenty of people have said, wow, that's, was that not really scary to let go of decision-making or budgeting or whatever it might be? And I guess I'm fortunate that I never really wanted to grow a business, because it's easier for me, therefore, to let it go. But I think that sort of letting go is important.
I think that's one lesson that we can take away from this. And I suppose it also ties into the current issue over hybrid working, how culture evolves in that type of stuff. We've got to move to a different style, and this gives us a focus on that. And we've overrun very slightly at that stage, so I do need to wrap it up. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story. And there's so much good stuff, that talk about the journey to sustainability and then beyond, that story about regenerative within there, I think will echo a lot with our audience, although it might scare them a little, which is a good thing, made a little bit uncomfortable. And thank you to our audience for listening to our latest episode of Business Noodles and Doodles. Hope you've enjoyed our conversation today. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to get updates and notifications on when our latest episode is available. Thank you very much, everyone.